Yeah, we'll just give it like 10 seconds and the live stream will get going. Everyone will okay that, and then you can begin. Thanks, Susan.
All right, for all of those who are here today, welcome to our program with Susi Snyder. We are so pleased and so happy to have her with us today, this important day. My name is Susan Mirsky. I'm the chair of MAPPA's Nuclear Disarmament Working Group and co-leader of our new Raytheon nuclear weapons campaign. So just a little bit today, the importance of today and why we wanted to have Susi Snyder here today. Today, September 26th, is the UN Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. In 2013, the United Nations General Assembly gathered to address the growing concern about the increase and dangers of nuclear weapons and thus designated this day every year to be named again, the UN Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Now, with the Ukraine war, we are right in the middle of these weapons being used. It seems that there's a willingness in many countries to build up their nuclear capabilities, more money being poured into weapons rather than human needs. It seems imperative that on this day, we take action. So ask your members of Congress to sign the ICAN pledge, support the Norton bill, and support Representative McGovern's new bill, which is basically back from the brink. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, quote, "We must eliminate these weapons before they eliminate us." A nuclear war can never be won and should never be started. There are no winners in a nuclear war. Today, our program, I'd like to introduce Paul Shannon, who is the leader of the Raytheon Anti-War Group and also co-leader of the Raytheon Nuclear Weapons Campaign. Paul.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. You've really put your finger on what an important day today is. And today, on behalf of the Raytheon Nuclear Weapons Project, would like to welcome everyone to this webinar. If there's an expert out there on nuclear weapons in the world, it is Susi Snyder. And so we're very fortunate to have Susi on today to talk about this day and what it means, and also to talk about the ongoing efforts around the world to eliminate nuclear weapons. Here in the United States, our focus is pretty narrow. We forget that other countries exist. However, this is a huge international movement going on, and we have to know about it because we are a small part of this, and we have to increase the role that we play in the United States on eliminating these weapons. So Susi is with us today. She's currently works as financial sector coordinator for ICAN, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons that some of you are familiar with. And she has coordinated the Don't Bank on the Bomb research and campaign from 2013. In addition to the annual Don't Bank on the Bomb reports that maybe some of you have seen, but if you're not familiar with them, you really should look at them and we'll learn an awful lot. Susi has published numerous reports and articles, including Squandered, 2021 Global Nuclear Weapons Spending, 101 Investors Say No to Nuclear Weapons. This is something we're not aware of, that investment portfolios all around the world are divesting from these weapons. And there's a lot for us to learn here. There's a number of other reports that she's done related to these topics. Susi has been featured on Project Syndicate, on CNBC, if you haven't seen that report that involved Susi, 360 Magazine, Quartz, the Intercept, Huffington Post, U.S. News and World Report, and Democracy Now! So Susi has been an expert on these issues for a long time, and that's why we're so fortunate to have her with us all the way from the Netherlands, if you can believe that. It's just amazing what technology can do for us now. So anyway, She is Susi worked as humanitarian disarmament program lead and managed the nuclear disarmament program at PAX in the Netherlands. Before that, she served as the Secretary General of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom at their Geneva Secretariat. So we're going to, some of these issues that Susan just raised before, tomorrow we'll be getting out links to all these different projects if you want to plug into them. But for today, we're very privileged to have Susi, and let's pay very close attention to what she has to say, because we have a lot to learn. Susi, thank you very much for joining us.
Great. Thank you all. This is super cool to be here. I'm very excited, and I'm excited for a number of reasons. I'm excited because I really like talking about nuclear weapons, which makes me a terrible party guest, but does, it does give me something a little unique to do. And I'm excited because I get to join you, my friends in Massachusetts, and so many great things have come out of the state. And I know there's others joining from other places outside of Massachusetts as well, but there's so many things happening within the state that are a constant inspiration for me wherever I am. And every time I hear about new things, I'm like, ooh, did they do that in Massachusetts already? Oh, they did. And I find out later that y'all have led the way. So I'm really excited and really honored to be a part of this and to get a chance to talk about the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. I'm going to run through a little bit about the day, about some of the things that I think it's really useful to know, and then some things that we can do, because it's always nice to know stuff that we can do. So as Paul mentioned, I work for ICAN. It's the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And to let you all know, we're more than 650 organizations in over 100 countries, which is really awesome because some organizations are huge, like Greenpeace is an ICAN member. That's a really big organization. And some organizations are tiny. But everyone that comes into the campaign shares the same belief that we can and must get rid of nuclear weapons. And that's what today is all about. That we know the only way to get rid of the threat of nuclear weapons is to get rid of them forever. And that's what we're looking to do. And my job, I'm one of the luckiest people on the planet because I have the coolest job. And my job is to talk to folks about getting rid of nuclear weapons from a financial perspective, and talking about why nuclear weapons are bad for business, because the companies that are involved in the production of nuclear weapons are not necessarily a good investment. And it's a way for people, when we go at it through the financial angle, through personal financial angles, it's a way for us to take our power back. And as Susan mentioned when she opened, nuclear weapons can be challenging to think about. Peace as an issue is a hard one. We feel disempowered constantly, but we are building an opportunity here, building an economy that is an alternative. And I want to let you know that investors are seeing this as the smart thing to do. So this year, we picked the theme for the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, that nuclear weapons are bad for business. And there's actions that are happening around the world. And let me tell you a little bit more about why. So the thing is, with the companies that are involved in the production of nuclear weapons, if we increase the cost for them to do business, if we increase that cost either by doing protests at their facilities, or we increase the cost by seeing opinion pieces or news articles that are talk about their bad behavior, or we increase their cost of doing business by let's say drawing attention to the negative reputation that they have for the work that they do, we increase the cost of doing business by these companies involved in the production of nuclear weapons. That makes investors stop investing. And we never know exactly why an investor chooses not to, but we do know we have some general ideas. A lot of the companies involved in the production of nuclear weapons are, they don't make good business sense. They have bad governance practices, which means that their board of directors has a crazy pay gap between the board, which, they get paid, and the personnel. Or the CEO is taking home 20 million, but not bringing in contracts. There's issues. Or, as we saw earlier this year, there are concerns because labor unions are organizing and there are strikes at facilities where people work because of bad pay. Now, people working at some of these companies, they're not striking because they're working on weapons. They're striking because they're not getting able to take time off to be ill, or they're not getting a reasonable cost of living adjustment. Doesn't matter. Still makes the company look bad. It increases their cost of doing business, and that turns investors off. Another part of our work is to let investors and others know that these companies are involved in stuff that is prohibited internationally. And that includes the production of nuclear weapons. And when we do that, when we increase the costs, we get the investors to stop. That's what changes the industry. And I say this and people kind of look at me and they think, yeah, okay, right. Like we're going to see, major defense contractors change what they're doing because, some investors stop. We've seen it happen before. And that's why I know that this is a tactic. It's not the only tactic we have, but this is a tactic that can really help get rid of nuclear weapons when we illustrate that nuclear weapons are bad for business. So we want to talk about the investments, right? We want to talk about who is behind the companies. Who are the investors that want to make they want to make a profit off of Raytheon. And I know this campaign works on Raytheon. I'm dropping a link in the chat right now that is this table. And you can see on this table who are the financial institutions, the banks, the pension funds that are trying to profit by investing in Raytheon. And the red ones are new investors that we found in the research, in 2021's research, which was published at the end of last year. The new research is coming at the end of November, beginning of December. Green ones are those who stopped investing, like American National Insurance stopped investing in Raytheon. This is good. There's quite a few. If you scroll down that list, there's a lot of investors listed. You got to scroll around the list and see who are the banks, who are the pension funds, who's connected, who's not connected. This is one of the things that we can do when we talk about these companies. We can talk about the companies, talk about the banks and the pension, talk about who's behind them, who wants to make a profit off of their success, who's worried about their failure. Because when we bring them information about the different failures, whether it be labor disputes or the ongoing production of key components for nuclear weapons, that makes them look risky, that makes them look like they're bad for business. And I'm not going to lie, when I talk to banks, they are not in the banking industry out of the kindness of their hearts. They're in the banking industry because they want to make some money. And what's a way to make money? That's their interest. So meet them at that point of interest. You want to make money, then you don't want to invest in a company that's doing something that's been prohibited under international law. It's bad for business. So we talk about that. We keep pushing on that. And it's a good tool that we have. So this is a table. You can sort it by, I filtered this by country, but you can look at all different ways to sort through and to look at this table. And find out, this is Raytheon, but there are 25 other companies listed on the Don't Bank on the Bomb website. If you're more interested in maybe Northrop Grumman, or you want to look into Lockheed Martin or BAE Systems. I always think BAE should get a lot more attention because they work on 3 different countries' nuclear weapons programs. But Raytheon just does Minuteman missiles for the US. It's terrible. Well, that's what they do. So we talk about the investments, and we want to go to investors and say, hey, quit doing this. If we're a client of the investor, we can go and say, stop, I want you to stop using my money for this. If we're not a client, we can say, hey, I'd like to open an account with you if you can prove to me that you're never going to use my money for nuclear weapons purposes. It's worth doing. And some of them are big. BlackRock is a big, heavy thing to shift. A big, heavy rock. Sorry, bad joke. But some of them are a little bit easier. And Ameriprise is one that's a little easier. They're not that big of an investor, and we can push them and change their behavior. And it helps because that helps change the company's behavior. Now, investors also have an opportunity to decide policies. And this is, for me, I love it. I love seeing policies that say something about nuclear weapons. It's one of the first questions I ask when I go to a bank, when I travel, especially pre-pandemic. I was traveling a lot. Everywhere I'd go into the local bank, wherever I was, and just walk in and ask the teller, hey, what's your guys' policy on nuclear weapon investments? Yeah, they never knew. But I just leave my name and my email address and say, can you find out and tell me? Not everyone got back to me, but a lot of them did. And they sent me up the line, and all of a sudden I had all these connections with like random credit unions and different, neighborhoods that I happened to be walking around in. It's worth doing because it also gives us an opportunity to start a conversation about the defense industry, to start a conversation and find out what is the person who works there, what is their opinion about it. One of our good friends within this campaign, his mom passed away and he inherited some money, and he didn't want to invest it in any bank that was connected to the production of weapons. So he went and they found a bank that was pretty good, but they weren't great. They didn't say anything about nuclear. So he kept going back to the bank and he kept going and meeting them. And he was very persistent. A lot of Catholic workers, very persistent. It was very persistent, but eventually he got the bank to say, okay, you know what? We will never invest any of our clients' money in the production of nuclear weapons, because he just went and kept asking. And we work on all sorts of issues, and we know we have to be persistent. We have to keep asking. We get policies, we get change. I want to talk a little bit about what's in the ban treaty, because this is also a tool for us. And not everybody knows, because the ban treaty, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons is relatively new in terms of our international legal toolkit. But I just want to talk about what it says in relation to investment and to the companies involved in the production of nuclear weapons. And I'll go through it real quick. So there's core prohibitions. It makes nuclear weapons illegal for any country that joins it. And it doesn't ask the question of whether that country has ever tested nuclear weapons. It doesn't matter. There is no segregation within this treaty. Every country that joins is equal under the eyes of this treaty. And that's really important because it prohibits clearly development, testing, production, manufacture, transfer, receipt, stationing, installation, or deployment of nuclear weapons and nuclear explosive devices. And I'll clarify those two things in a second. Now, this is comprehensive, it's thorough, and it's useful because not every country is going to necessarily join this treaty, but when they do, like last week, 5 more countries signed the treaty, 2 more ratified it. They build up the stigma against nuclear weapons. They make all of these things to do with nuclear weapons illegitimate. And that is powerful for us. And that's the kind of thing that forces a country like Russia, who threatened to use nuclear weapons in February, and in August turned around and said, they tried to gaslight the international community. They said, no, we didn't say that. We didn't say that. We didn't say that. Why? Because more and more countries signed on to these prohibitions, used this tool of this prohibition treaty to say any threats are also illegal under the treaty. Any threat is unacceptable. That delegitimization, that stigmatization is powerful, and we cannot underestimate it. And it is the one thing that over and over the naysayers will say, nah, it doesn't work, it's just opinion. Who cares what Burkina Faso says? I care what Burkina Faso says, because when Burkina Faso signs onto this treaty, they're saying we, as a former colony, are rejecting the colonialist oppression of nuclear weapons. We're never going to get beyond that. And we're never going to get, we're never going to allow that to happen for our country. And it's really important to see this growing and growing, the stigma that comes from these prohibitions. It is powerful. It is why countries like the US have not signed the landmine treaty, but have not made a landmine in 10 years, have not signed the Convention on Cluster Munitions, but companies in the US, when they were asked by the Trump administration to make cluster bombs again, said, ho, isn't there a treaty about that? We don't want to mess around with that. It's powerful, and we can't underestimate the power. And so I love talking about it. I think it's the coolest thing. Again, I'm fun at dinner parties. In the treaty as well, there's a prohibition on assistance. And for me, this is what I go to every day, because it applies to any sort of funding of the prohibited activities, that development, that production, that manufacture. And so you can't do the direct funding of that, but it also encompasses things like, not only state funding. So it's not only like the government of, say, the Netherlands cannot finance the production of nuclear weapons, but also the Dutch pension fund, national pension fund, wouldn't be able to under the treaty. And private banks and individuals not able to finance the production of nuclear weapons under the treaty. This, again, increases the risk and the cost of doing business with those companies. If you're in a country that is a part of this treaty, and there's more of those every day, then the chances of you being involved with one of those companies as a financier, as an investor, are limited. And this is not something that gets talked about much in the US context, but in 10 years' time, the largest economy on the planet is Nigeria's. Nigeria is joining onto this treaty. We have to think about bigger pictures than what we might get from our media sources. The world is not the way that we always think and maybe have assumed that it is. And these economies that are growing, the BRICS economies in particular, South Africa's economy is huge, Nigeria's economy is huge, and they are helping to shape the course of a world without nuclear weapons through this treaty. So I want to remind about those powers. Now, I said I'd clarify between nuclear weapons and nuclear explosive devices, because I used to get the argument all the time, well, there's no definition about what a nuclear weapon is. But there is an understanding under international law. I think it's really important that people get this. It's the nuclear explosive device is that bit of plutonium or highly enriched uranium that puts the nuclear bomb. But the bomb is also part of the nuclear weapon, and so is the missile that delivers it. So when we're talking about prohibition, we're also prohibiting those Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics designed missiles. That work is illegal under this treaty. Gives us a nice little tool. Now, things have been happening since the treaty went into force. Like, it's really good, and it's very exciting, and it could be such a downer to work on nuclear weapons issues because it's a downer. I mean, it's horrible. What gets the most media attention is the bad stuff. It's last week Putin saying again, oh yeah, you know what? We're not bluffing about possibly using nuclear weapons. It's the downer of the US, I forgot his name, Sullivan's response saying, don't worry, we warned Russia there would be catastrophic consequences if they do use nuclear weapons. That is a downer. No doubt. It's important to know, it's important that we address. However, we have to remember and celebrate the good things, because that's what keeps us involved in this issue. That's what keeps us going. That's what gives us hope. And we do this not just to be down all the time. We do this because we want a beautiful, wonderful world to live in that doesn't have this nuclear sword of Damocles hanging over our head. So since the entry into force, which happened in January 2021, of the ban treaty, here's some cool things. 2 companies that used to be involved in the production of nuclear weapons stopped. They stopped. ICAN used to be contracted to manage a bunch of nuclear weapon production facilities across the US, no longer doing that. And Serco, which is a British company and managed the British atomic weapons establishment, they came out and said, you know, we're not going to do this anymore because investors, ethical investors, are cutting us out of portfolios. We're never going to bid on another contract. We're having an impact. This is two little things, but two big companies that had multi-million, multi-year contracts, and they quit that behavior because of the pressures that we're bringing about. It's very cool. And we'll see more. I don't know when, but we will see more. I'm going to stay super positive. We've also seen significant drops in investment. So divestment, people throw the word around, not always clear about it. It's the opposite of investment. You invest to make a profit, you divest, you sell off the holding. So divestment we've seen happen from, especially within countries that have signed on to the treaty, but not just. And that's what's cool as well. There are also financial institutions, there's pension funds, there's some insurance companies that are saying, no, we're not gonna join, we're not gonna support, we're not gonna provide any money to these companies that are involved in the production of nuclear weapons because we heard about this treaty. It makes it too risky for us. We're not into it. And so we're seeing in Ireland, it was quite a big thing. Ireland ratified the treaty and it went into force for Ireland. And then the state fund, there's this big news article about the state fund dropping for more than 61 billion in investments. It was great. And they said, you know, and it came back, this is because of the treaty. In Switzerland, there's a conglomerate of Swiss pension funds. Switzerland hasn't yet joined the ban treaty, but the parliament in Switzerland said that they have to. Now they're in the process of it. And when the parliament decided that, this conglomerate of Swiss pension funds said, ooh, we have to make money. That's our number one job. We're going to get out ahead of this. And they dropped all of their investments. It's huge. It's called Publica. It was big news, massive drop of investments. And they said, we're never going back because now our returns are stable. Because the defense sector did some skyrocketing earlier this year, and then it crashed again in June. And then it's up and it's down. Now there's no computer chips and they're flailing all over the place. The defense sector is not a healthy investment. And if your job is as a pension, you manage a pension fund, or you're an asset manager, your insurance company, whatever it is, your job is to make money. Your fiduciary duty, your number one responsibility is to turn over a profit. Investing in an industry that relies on instability to make a profit is not going to get you there in the long term. So it's a good tool for us. Anyway, we've had some great divestment. We've also seen, I told you about how much I love these policies that say we're never going to invest in nuclear weapon producers again. A lot of them come out with, we're never going to invest in weapons. Some of them say weapons producers. A lot of them say we're never going to invest in controversial weapons producers. So a controversial weapon is a weapon that has been prohibited under international law. Bioweapons, chemical weapons, landmines, cluster munitions. Now nuclear weapons are getting added to that mix. And surprisingly, an overwhelming number of financial institutions also prohibit investment in companies that make depleted uranium weapons, even though there's no international treaty. They say it's just inhumane, it's unacceptable, we can't do it. For those who might connect on that issue, it's good to know. But since the ban treaty went into effect, we've seen the number of policies naming nuclear weapons skyrocket, and the number of policies that explicitly talk about the ban treaty itself went from 0 to 8. It's not like, you know, a rocket taking off, but it's not nothing. And it represents quite a lot of money, because those 8 institutions, it's almost $4 trillion in assets under management. It's about 1% of global wealth. So it's not nothing, and it's growing. Now we've got 37 institutions that talk about the ban treaty, but that report's not out yet. We're getting there. Anyway, we're seeing this grow in the policies. Oops. Wrong click. Now, the way that we do all of this is not alone. It's like, I'd love you to think that I did it, but I didn't. This is this is a huge global movement, and it takes a lot of different things. So it takes individual action. It takes political action. We've seen in New York City, legislation passed calling on New York City pension funds to divest from nuclear weapon producers. I know there's pending legislation similarly in Massachusetts, state of Massachusetts, as well as Rhode Island on weapons producers. These are good things. Even the discussion is powerful for us. There's research, lots of research that happens, and research can be a tool for action. In Japan, it was just published over the weekend. There's research that's been conducted by the Japanese Association for the Prevention of War, which is the Japanese branch of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. And the Japanese Association did this research. They asked all of the mega banks in Japan what they knew about the ban treaty, if they had investments, what they knew about Don't Bank on the Bomb as a project, and whether they would set up a policy on investing in weapons. By the act of doing that research, they have started conversations and gone from 0 response to now 3 of these mega banks have policies that talk about weapons. They're not great yet, but it's changing. It's changing. And it's in the process of doing that research. So research can be a really powerful tool. There's also the work that we do among groups and in institutions. I always encourage people, if you go to church, ask your church what their investment policy is. What does the pastor's pension fund invest in? It's a great question to ask, and it starts that conversation in another way. And is it based on values? And we see, for example, there are a lot of institutions in the Islamic faith that practice Sharia investment. And that means no weapons, no gambling, no pornography, no tobacco, no drugs, no alcohol, like super restricted. But it's a way to kind of demonstrate, an investment in values. And it's also, they're not investing in weapons, and they're definitely not investing in nuclear weapons. So I encourage people to talk to other groups or institutions that you might be connected to, foundations that might be funding your work as different organizations. The local Philharmonic, right? Where's their pension? What is their pension funding? And what is it not? It's worth having the conversation outside of our usual room, if you will. It's also worth talking to unions. Oh yeah, Susan, please.
Susie,
Yes.
I'm sorry to break into this fascinating talk. You mentioned different clips, and I'm just seeing this one picture. So I didn't know if you were aware that
My screen not sharing correctly.
that we're not seeing all your wonderful materials.
Oh no. Oh gosh, thank you.
Certainly described. Yeah,
It
you're
was at the
describing what
beginning,
you're
but it's-
talking about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan, for telling me. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's so weird. Oh well, you know what? I'll send the link. I'll send the slides, and maybe those who are interested can find it afterwards. So sorry about that. I can also drop my email in the chat, and people, if they want it, I'll send it to them. But yeah, so talking about like different institutions. Oh gosh. And it's worth going outside of our usual bubbles, and talking to people, because we might not connect on everything, but we have some connection with folks, and it's a way to do this. And then finally, there's always the behind the scenes things that happen that we don't always get to talk about, whether it be meetings with the companies themselves that are involved in the production of nuclear weapons. Those meetings do take place, or at least exchanges of letters with lots of lawyers in CC, or there be meeting with banks that we can't talk about until we can announce the new policy. And it's important to make sure that we create space in our movement and in our efforts to let that kind of thing happen as well. And it's just going to be really awkward. And but I always like to mention it because it does feel awkward. Like, you want to tell everybody what you're doing, all the time, and sometimes you can't. And we have to build within ourselves the trust and understanding that, you know, we're all in this together and we're all trying to do the same thing, even if we can't talk about it. So I wanted to mention those different things. Let's see if we can see. And then as an individual, what you can do as an individual. Like I said, I love to go into banks and talk to people because I'm like that. I walk up to the tellers and I ask them questions and they don't know the answer and I leave my email address. And sometimes they get back to me. And I encourage other people to talk to their banks directly. I've noticed, at least in my neighborhood, we don't have banks anymore. Like there just aren't any. They've all closed down and everything has moved to e-banking or use your phone for banking. But on your phone, if you do use your phone for banking, and you know, I'm a digital native, so I do, there's always a chat function and you can ask folks, you can ask questions like, hey, what's the policy around weapons? Hey, what are we doing on this issue? Or, hey, I'm concerned about Ukraine. What's the bank doing? Because a lot of banks are doing things and we might not know, and they want to tell people. And why not change the chat bots instructions by asking them questions that they don't have an automatic answer for? Break through the algorithm, change the chat bot, and asking questions about weapons. It's a great way to do it because it is not a help feature that most e-banking has as a frequently asked question. So it's worth getting through, and you never know what kind of conversation you'll startle. Similarly, questions asked on banks or pension funds in particular, they can move quite quickly and often do have policies around what type of investment they'll look at or not. Asking questions on Facebook pages. Again, it's an audience that people who see that are not going to be necessarily people who come to a meeting like this. And it's worth trying to reach out and talk to new folks about this. And you might be surprised who might help and who not. And there's always something that you can do is, say, well, if you're not willing to do this, then I'm going to look for somebody else. And this is where there is an opportunity to go local. And credit unions do not invest in securities and publicly traded securities for the most part. They can be, you can be pretty confident that they're not going to invest in companies that are involved in weapons production. They're going to invest in local real estate and mortgages for other people in your neighborhood. That's kind of why they're there. So you can take a look and think about that. And if you want to check where your bank has investments or doesn't have investments, if you want to check your bank, you can use Don't Bank on the Bomb. If you want to check your personal investment, your pension or something like that, your mutual funds you might be tied to, I would recommend Weapons Free Funds, which is a project of As You Sow. And we use the same data. And they're really good in looking at this. And they'll also help around other questions, other issues about ethical investment or sustainable investments that you might be interested in. You can look for carbon free, you can look for fossil fuel free. They're doing stuff around racial diversity and gender representation on boards and things. It's a super handy tool. It's US centric, but that's awesome. It's great for people in the US to use. And I recommend the Weapons Free Funds to take a look at those. Finally, I want to talk about, is this the International Day of Action? And I want to just relate that things are happening everywhere. So, today there was demonstrations in Berlin at the Alexanderplatz. There was this beautiful exhibition that was launched by the Italian Red Cross that'll be shown all over Italy. It's gorgeous, and it talks about what nuclear weapons do and how we can use things like the ban treaty to get rid of them. Across the UK, there have been a ton of activities at facilities connected to the production of nuclear weapons. Rolls-Royce is the one that I saw the most about, but all sorts of different a lot of different things at the bases, at the atomic weapons establishment, at Farnsborough. The UN Secretary General, started today off saying now is the time to eliminate nuclear weapons from our world. It's a great message to start the day with. That's a message I like to start a Monday with. And in Sweden over the weekend, there's a Mexican artist by the name of Pedro Reyes, who has done an absolutely incredible exhibition called Amnesia Atomica. And it's this 30-foot tall inflatable atomic bomb, or mushroom cloud, excuse me. And that combined with these balloons that say zero nukes and no nuclear weapons. And if you can see the poster behind me, change strategy, change doctrine, abolish nuclear weapons. This is his work. And they did this in Stockholm in front of the parliament in Sweden this morning. And over the weekend as well. And there's just a few of the activities that we've seen so far today. They're on the side of the time zones because I haven't gotten through all the stuff on the other time zones. But I know also through the cooperation with the Pace Bene and the campaign Nonviolence that there's at least 5,000 activities that are planned during this week that talk about investments, that talk about nuclear weapons, that talk about ending violence and bringing about peace, and using the different tools at our disposal in our campaign activities to do so. So I think I'm going to end it there. I've talked a lot because you've been very generous and gracious with the time, and I'm sure there's questions because I also talk really fast. So thanks, everybody.
Okay, Susie, thank you so much. A lot of information there, a lot of important information. And we're hoping that folks might have some questions for Susie. And if you do, please use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and raise your hand. And Brian will be so good to locate you and unmute you so you can ask your question. I'll call out your name and then you'll be unmuted to ask your question. We'd ask people to limit their questions to 1 minute so we can get in as many as possible. So let's see, any questions to start?
I see Judith Sheldon with a hand up.
Okay, Judith, okay, sounds good.
Thank you
Judith,
so much.
and then after Judith, we have Mary Dean.
Thank you so much. I'll be brief, but I really appreciate this session. On the list that you gave, I understood the green marks and I understood the red marks. What are the institutions who don't have any marks? What does that mean?
Thanks. Thank you for giving me a nice, easy softball to start. The ones with no marks means they've had investments for more than 1 year at a time. So they're a little bit longer term investors. And then I put the link in the chat to see all of them, and you can sort the way you want.
Okay, thanks. Next question, Mary, was it?
Did you say Mary Dean? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Susie. You are such a enthusiastic and very clear speaker. I had noticed that there were no slides going up because you really hold attention and you're very, very clear. But my quick question is, are there any specific banks that you would recommend as being nuclear free?
Thanks, Mary. I want to preface this by saying that I am not a financial professional. I do not give financial advice. And I just want to make sure that that's super clear. The banks that I know of that are like the one that I always come back to, it operates in the I'm not sure if it operates in Massachusetts. It's the Amalgamated Bank. They were one of the first in the US to adopt a clear policy. And I'd have to look beyond that. I know Amalgamated's been pretty great. But that's the only that I can think of just off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I didn't. I should have looked more before I got on the call.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you so much.
Susie, let me just jump in on that. So are there mutual funds or or other pension funds or whatever that come to mind that have adopted this type of policy?
Yeah, so I know of more than 100 different institutions that have adopted these types of policies, but they're scattered all over the world. So let me give you the link for those who have good policies, and then you can pull that up and see if your folks are on the list. And if not, there might be two reasons. Like there could be two reasons they're not on the list. Number one, they have a policy and I didn't know because it's only a handful of people doing the research and we don't have capacity to check everything. We go a lot by word of mouth. So if nobody tells us that there's a policy or there might be a policy, we don't automatically look into it. So you can check to see that if you're there, and if not, it's either because we didn't know or because there isn't one. And that's more often than not, it's because there is not a policy in place or it's not public. A lot of institutions have a policy but don't put anything on their website about it. And this is a really easy thing they can do. And there's no restriction about not being allowed to put information about the types of investment that you make or the way that you judge investment. In fact, across Europe, there is a requirement now. As of the 1st of January, 2023, all financial institutions within the European Union will be obligated to publish how they deal with environmental, social, and governance, ESG criteria. So how do they use that? And that will mean everything from, do they invest in fossil fuels? Do they not? They have to say, and they have to answer a whole series of questions under EU regulation. And that's great. And that is forcing US investors to also take steps to be more transparent. And it's actually good for business when clients know what they do and what they don't do. And the Michael Bloomberg, who you all may know and I recall as being an interesting character, published a piece about 2 weeks ago now, an opinion piece talking about how important it is that this information is available for people because if your financial institution does not consider these questions when they're making investments and they decide what to invest, it's a risk for that institution. It's a long-term and a short-term risk. Like if you're only thinking about what happens tomorrow and you're not thinking about what happens next year in the companies that you invest or that you lend to, then you're not doing your job. Similarly, there's a UN Principles for Responsible Investment that more financial institutions than not around the world are supportive of. And through that, they talk about not investing in illegal products or products that are known to cause human rights harm. It's applied differently in different places. It's not a legal obligation, it's a voluntary thing. But again, it builds the norm, it builds the pressure, it gives us an opportunity to ask. It's a very low threshold to say we support the UN Principles for Responsible Investment. It's easy. And it might be a starting place if you don't want to quite get into the conversation about nuclear weapons or about Raytheon in particular or about war materials, but just kind of asking about what do you do around responsibility around ESG. It's a way to kind of to keep that dialogue going, and dialogue leads to change. So it's a conversation worth having.
Okay, thank you, Susie. Thanks for hanging on there, Joanne and Robin. Let's go to Joanne Dufour next.
And Susie, this has been absolutely marvelous. I just wanted to hold up. Now I understand you're the author of this, and I got this in New York at the UN. But how can people actually get a copy of it?
Oh yeah, I'll drop the link in the chat. That's so cool. I haven't seen it in print yet, Joanne. That's amazing. Oh.
Yeah, they were distributing it, and so I grabbed it. But I mean, it's wonderful to hand. I was handing it to if I talk to someone that is at the higher level of my finances, like the central office or something, I would send them this because I said, make sure, and they didn't know, so this has the information.
Okay, well,
Thanks so
that's
much,
great.
Susan.
And
The link's in the
like I
chat.
said, we will be getting links like this out to people as a follow-up to this webinar. So hopefully you'll be able to pick those links up there. Next is Robin, and then Phoebe.
Yeah, because the nuclear weapons are so dangerous and insane, don't we need to get much faster action to get the ICAN treaty going by putting the pressure on these politicians in all these countries that have the weapons, that if they don't work to abolish them, are you a fascist, warmonger, a tool of the weapon makers, or just an asshole? Can we say stuff like that to these national politicians and put the pressure on them?
Depends on where we are and the kind of conversation that we want to have. I'm a big fan of saying, let's make sure that we get money out of politics. Let's look at this, this issue of who's allowed to donate to campaigns, and who isn't, and what is the role of political action committees in setting things up, and why does the arms industry give more money to Democrats than it does to Republicans? These are good questions to ask. And if there's a lot of good information and what you want to do and where you want to put your energy, I'd say, let's get countries on board the treaty, and let's do that in the ways that we think we can have best success.
Okay, thank you. Phoebe, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Susie. It's just been great. It's been great listening to you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought you were very clear, and it was all I could do to focus on your brilliant words, and I didn't really miss the images either. I was just curious, in my experience as a faith-based peacemaker over a few decades, I was really happy when you were suggesting that we ask churches about pastors' pensions and churches' investment, and I'm sure that would work on an interfaith basis as well. But I've noticed a decline in interfaith work for abolition and to stop war and stuff since the end of the Cold War. And I just wondered what you might have heard about any kind of work to help people in different kinds of congregations understand better the gravity of the problem and how it might be integrated with people's vision for priorities that we want to work on.
Whew, that is a very big question, Phoebe. My goodness, I appreciate it. I think again, it's everywhere we go, people want to feel connected and think about the issues that they're seeing and feeling every single day, and find hope and solace and community in dealing with those issues. It's hard to see nuclear weapons as part of that, unless we start talking about the money. And that's a way to kind of reconnect to the everyday. When I think about how much money is squandered on nuclear weapons and how much tax money, it's $1.7 trillion over 30 years. That's crazy. It's 80,000 a minute. Like this is money that could be spent on a lot of other things. And I looked and thought about it the other day that if you take something like a year of nuclear weapons spending, you could cancel all U.S. college debt for anybody under the age of 35, right? You know, you could get rid of, there's been the fellows from Ben and Jerry's tweeted something over the weekend about all the different things you could do with nuclear weapons money instead of nuclear weapons. It's everything from end homelessness, universal health care, all these things. And so that's where we connect. And somebody put in the chat, Mary Bowler here put in the chat, the Poor People's Campaign is actively involved, and that's exactly the way to connect here. Let's reshift priorities, and let's demand that those who make the decisions on the budgets, they hear from us when it's time to make decisions on the budget. When it's time to debate the spending bills, they hear from us. When it's time to look at local government spending, they hear from us. Because a politician will never make a decision out of the goodness of their own heart. They'll make a decision if they think it's going to cost them votes in the next election. And that's where their interests are. And we need to speak to their interests. And I think it's hard to remember to do that. I get too riled up. It's really hard, but it's possible. And I think it's powerful. And when we work with each other like this, and we bring that into our places of worship, and we connect our spirituality to it, well, we can be unstoppable. And we've managed to stop nuclear war until now. And I think we can keep doing that, and we can actually reverse it. So thank you for the really, really, really hard question, Phoebe.
Thank you, Susie.
Okay, thank you, Susie. I don't see any other questions. We're starting to run out of time here, but so I'd like to ask to zero in on this issue of the illegality of nuclear weapons. So is the basis of the illegality the new treaty that different countries have signed on to, or is it the Non-Proliferation Treaty clause in section 6 or 7, whichever one it was? What is the basis of these weapons being illegal?
It's a great question. So thank you, Paul. It's a little bit, it's not an easy answer. So the new treaty makes it illegal for every country that signs onto the treaty. Then it becomes, when you ratify a treaty, it becomes part of your national law. So it's handy for, in the US, it's Article 6 of the US Constitution means that international treaties that the US has signed on to automatically become part of national law. The US has not signed on to the new nuclear weapons treaty. The US has signed on to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is a treaty designed to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. But the deal was, we stopped spreading nuclear weapons. All of those who never tested a bomb before 1967, those who never tested a bomb before 1967 promise they will never get one. In exchange, the 5 countries that did test bombs before 1967 will negotiate their total elimination and their disarmament. That is part of US law, the obligation to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons and disarmament. Some things have happened. So it's not, the weapons themselves are not illegal, but the obligation to get them illegal is there. So it's like a couple of steps removed, but it's very important to keep reminding that this exists, this obligation exists. And to also remember, like, we've come a long way. So, when I was little, there were more nuclear weapons in the world than I can even imagine. There were, 87,000 nuclear weapons in the world. There are 13,000 now. And that's because of these treaties. It's because the Non-Proliferation Treaty has helped facilitate that. It didn't eliminate the weapons themselves, but it created the urgency and the need to negotiate their elimination in other places to a point when we're just going to finish the job. And we have a new treaty that helps us finish the job and add more pressure to finish the job. So under those treaties, that's the way it stands. But the Non-Proliferation Treaty, this one that's kind of a little fuzzy, they brought it to the World Court to get some clarification in the mid-90s. What does it actually mean? because, you know, countries like to say, you know how lawyers are, right? We like to say things that, you know, we make you believe stuff. And so they brought it to the World Court, and the World Court said, yes, this obligation to negotiate the complete elimination of nuclear weapons is binding. You have to do it, and you have to do it with some urgency. And so there is a World Court decision that also says, you know, that this is a clear obligation on these countries to get to zero through a process of negotiations. So that didn't answer your question. I wish I could say, yeah, they're super totally illegal right now under everything, but law is complicated, and it's made complicated because lawyers like to have stuff to do, I guess. Sorry. I love lawyers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the legal issues. Those are the legal basis of the statement that they're illegal. So let me just say this. We're winding down here, but there are two important things I want people to know. The first is we need people to sign up to support this new campaign called the Raytheon Nuclear Weapons Campaign. We want to use this campaign to highlight the dangers of nuclear weapons and to get all this information out that Susie is talking about. To do that, we need to know we can count on you from time to time to participate in our activities, whether it's calling Congress, whether it's being at a rally, whether it's supporting a divestment campaign, whatever it is. So we need you to sign up just as a supporter. It doesn't mean you have to come out to everything or anything else, but you'll be kept informed of what's going on and you will participate as you can. So Brian, have you put that link in again? If people could go to that link in the chat, it will take you to a form where you can say, hey, I support this campaign. Let me know what's going on, okay? So if you could sign that, that would be terrific. Then for all of you here in Massachusetts, and unfortunately, Susie will not be able to join us this afternoon at 5 o'clock. But at 5 o'clock, we will be at Fresh Pond Parkway outside of, Whole Foods there at the shopping center. Millions of cars go by, and we will be there with this message. And we invite you to join us. That's 5 o'clock today. We'll go just from 5 to 6. Thousands of cars will see us. We have a wonderful new banner that Cole and Brian have made. And we're really excited about this rally coming out. So please join us if you can at 5 o'clock today. It's the type of thing we'll be doing. And then the last question I have for Susie is this, because I'm kind of lazy in terms of the research. Is there a place that we can go that has a list of the banks or investment companies or religious institutions or whatever? Is there a list somewhere of those institutions that have agreed not to invest in companies producing nuclear weapons?
There is, and I just dropped it back in the chat. And you look at who divests. And if you know of others, you can always let me know. I'm going to drop my email. It's Susie@icanw.org. You can drop me a note, and I'm happy to help you find stuff. And it's really important. Like, no matter what type of action that we take, all of it matters. And I just want to leave with that thought, to remember that, you know, nobody changes the world by themselves, right? Nobody knows what it was that stopped a bomb from being dropped, that made somebody take their finger off the trigger. Nobody knows what that is. And it's the combined actions that we are doing. It's the way that we're thinking about this. It's the way that we put ourselves and put this effort into the world to create the world that we want to live in, the world that we want to raise our children in, our families in, the world that we have such good community. We do that by lots of different types of actions. So whatever it is that you can do, it matters. And it helps. So wherever you are, something you can do will make a difference. So I just want to leave with that thought that remember, it all helps. And it creates the world that we're really proud to be in. So thank you so much for today.
I just
you.
want to say thank you so much, Susie, and to all of you who are here today, and to echo something I saw in the chat by Packy Wieland, that this, Susie, this was a most practical presentation now for the activists to go to work. Thank you all.
Thanks a million, Susie. If you get any reports in all your free time, to send us any information about stuff going on around the world today, if that gets collected over the next couple of days, that'd be great.
I will do. So
Great.
thank you all very much.
Bye now.